Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday the 13th, and we will hear the presentation, Technology Tools for Sustainability. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. I will do my best to answer those technical questions that you might have. For questions related to today's presentation, you can, again, just type those in the questions box and we will answer those at the end of the presentations during a designated Q&A. And it would help us if your question is for a particular panelist, if you could put the panelist's name in the question. That just kind of helps with us fielding them and getting them organized for our panelists to answer them. So again, just type all your questions in that questions box and we'll get to those at the end during the Q&A. Coming up next on your screen is a list of sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2022. Thanks to all those participating APA sponsors for making these webcasts possible and especially free to members. And today we are sponsored by a group of divisions. I think we have about 10 divisions so far participating in this steering committee within the Sustainability and Resiliency series here that you'll learn a little bit more about in a few moments. So thanks to all of those divisions that are this collaborative that came together to do this, and you can learn more about joining this collaborative here in a moment. Let's see if I can get my next screen. There we go. Today's session is worth 1.5 SAM credits for live viewing. We also have, and I didn't put it here on my slide, one of the sustainability credits, the new credits, the required credit that you're going to need for my AICP folks. So again, one of those specialized sustainability credits or your regular 1.5 credit. And this session is available on demand, which means you can view the session at any point during this calendar year and you can receive credit for the session. So to log your credits, you're going to head over to planning.org and log into your My APA account. And from there, you can either search by today's title or the event number. Both of those are found on our webcast website, which is ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you are on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes. When we have a new batch of sessions that are available for you to register for, I try to post on Facebook as our social media platform. And we record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So if you just head over to YouTube and type in Planning Webcast Series, we'll come up along with our well over 400 recordings that are available for you to view at no cost. And recently, this Sustainability and Resiliency series that's going on right now, I have actually created a playlist specifically for all of these sessions so that if you're particularly interested on the topic or you're interested in getting that required specialized credit, you can just head over to our YouTube channel and select playlist, and from there you can select the Sustainability and Resiliency series playlist, and you can see all of the sessions that are available within that. To register for any of our upcoming sessions, which we host webcasts just about every Friday, you can head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. That's where all of our information is, links to our YouTube channel, links to the titles, the event numbers, and of course, links to register for all of our upcoming sessions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Carla, who's representing the Sustainable Communities Division and this consortium of this cross-divisional effort of this series, who is going to talk a little bit more about that and kind of kick things off. Carla, I just gave those controls over to you.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the Sustainability and Resilience series, everybody. I'm Carla Evenbach. I'm the volunteer chair of this multi-divisional series and a private planning consultant in Southeast Florida. In this capacity and also representing the Sustainable Communities Division, I'm happy to present today's session, which is going to provide useful information on two robust technology tools for helping you plan for sustainability in your communities. We'll see how they're applied and also have the opportunity to ask questions. We have two wonderful speakers lined up to show us these tools, and you'll meet them shortly. If you've attended any of our past 5 series sessions, you'll know that I usually pop in here to tell you a little about the series overall and encourage you to participate further. I'd like to let you know that the series was created to provide learning opportunities for professional planners and to support the AICP new mandatory sustainability and resilience credit, as Christine has said. The series and the development of the credit for it were founded on these definitions of planning for sustainability and resilience, and on the 12 content topic areas that fall under this wide umbrella of sustainability and resilience. So as Christine alluded to, you have options within this series. You can earn AICP-CM credit, either regular credit or the mandatory sustainability and resilience credit for either the live or the on-demand versions. And this sort of on-demand permanent library of resources is available to you at no charge. Already available as recordings on demand are 2 sessions held in September on extreme weather trends, 2 sessions in January on climate science and planning, as well as 1 in February on the relationship of climate resilience and health, told through the lens of planning with Native American communities. Today's session will be there soon as well if you have any colleagues who might enjoy viewing it. I will mention that coming up on June 10th, we have a session on federal funding tools for sustainable infrastructure, which includes TOD. This is also now open for registration and will include some really great information from a panel of speakers from U.S. Department of Transportation, HUD, and EPA. Finally, we're looking actively for AP members to help on our planning committee, to help organize sessions, to advise on the implementation of the series, to help promote it, and to connect us with good speakers on the series topics. So anyone interested, please reach out to me at the email address here on the screen, and I'll be happy to talk with you more. And just speaking of the series topics, upcoming sessions are going to get into such topics as climate adaptation, climate mitigation, economic strategies, preparedness strategies, policy tools, among other things. So you'll also find that all sessions will endeavor to meaningfully examine social equity implications and raise the bar for how marginalized communities are embraced in the planning process. So I'm now going to hand this over to Jim Schwab, my colleague and friend on the series committee, to introduce the speakers. Jim, take it over.
Well, welcome to the Sustainability and Resilience series. I'm Jim Schwab, independent planning consultant in Chicago, also adjunct at the University of Iowa School of Planning and Public Affairs, and immediate past chair of the Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Planning Division, which has been assisting with this series. Today's session will highlight some of the most important technology tools available for planners to understand and illustrate the impacts of climate change in their communities, including issues like sea level rise, changing weather patterns, and lake level fluctuations in the Great Lakes. The goal is to help you make better use of these tools in your efforts to create more sustainable and climate resilient communities, particularly in communicating risk to stakeholders and how they can be used by disadvantaged communities. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and we're grateful to our speakers for bringing us up to speed on this valuable topic. As always, this program will be recorded and made available online for later viewing. So on to the program, and our first speaker is Doug Marcy, Coastal Hazard Specialist at the Noaa Office for Coastal Management in Charleston, South Carolina. After him, Dan Rizza of Climate Central will take care of introducing himself, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. So, Doug, take it over.
I am actually going to take over for a moment and do a couple quick polls that the panelists have asked that we do. So if everyone wants to go ahead and turn their webcams off for now, we will go through these 3 polls, and then Doug will take things away. So for those of you that are on a computer or a laptop, you should be fine. If you're on a mobile device, sometimes the polling questions act up a little bit. So just beware if you are on a mobile device. So I'm about to release or launch, I guess, our first polling question. Right up on your screen, you just click yes or no. Does your agency or planning group use SLR projection information for planning? That is our first question. So if you want to go ahead and answer that. And SLR is sea level rise, just for acronyms sake. Okay, I'll just wait a couple more moments here. I can see like kind of what percentage of folks have had the opportunity to answer. So I'll just wait until we hit a certain percent and I'll close it up, and then we can see the results here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close this poll and share the results. So does your agency or planning group use sea level rise projection information for planning purposes? 23% say yes, and our majority, 77%, say no. Our next one I'm launching now. What has been your primary use of technology tools? And your options for this are, and please select one, determine potential risk, assist in a planning process, risk communication, data download and analysis, or I haven't used any of these tools yet. So go ahead and select that. And we'll give it a few moments. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll just to keep us on track here and share the results. So your primary use of technology tools, determining my house's potential risk, 7%, assist in a planning process with partners, 24%, risk communication, 5%, data download and analysis, 24%, and I haven't used any of these tools yet, is 40%, which is our majority. So the next group down from that is data downloads and analysis and assisting in planning process with partners. Our final poll here, I'm going to go ahead and launch that one now. So this last question is, if you had used tools such as Noaa's SLR viewer or Climate Central's Maps Risk Finder, what has been your primary use? So use Viewer Map as a web app, assessed and used map services or methods, downloaded inundation data, downloaded DEMs, and then downloaded fact sheets, reports, tables, and DEMs, correct me if I'm wrong, digital elevation models, am I right?
Yes.
Thank you. So folks want to go ahead and put your selections in here. I'll give it a few more, I'll collect responses for a few more moments and then view the results, and then we'll get into the meat of today's presentation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close now and share those results. So 53% have used a viewer map as a web app. 13% assessed and used map services or methods, 10% downloaded inundation data, 8% downloaded the digital elevation models, and 15% downloaded fact sheets, reports, tables, things like that. So the overwhelming majority of 53% is used a viewer map as a web app. So that's what we're working with today. And I have just closed that poll, and now I am going to change the controls over to you, Doug. So if you want to throw your camera back on, and I just sent you the controls, we can get started today. Thanks everyone for participating in our polls. It's always helpful to kind of see who is in the audience. So thank you for doing that. Looks great.
Okay. I don't know if I should keep on sharing my webcam. I guess
You can if you like. It's totally up to you.
Okay. Well, it may take some more bandwidth to do that, so I'll just talk. I'll apologize in advance. I'm working from home, and so if you hear dogs barking, that's just part of life these days. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you guys today. I noticed on the polls there that maybe some of you are not from coastal states, potentially is why some of the numbers were low as far as using sea level rise information. Or perhaps what we'll do here is introduce you to some of this information that you can use and how it's been ingested into some of our tools for helping to plan for future sea level rise and coastal flooding. Again, my name is Doug Marcy. I'm at the Noaa Office for Coastal Management. I'm with Noaa National Ocean Service. And I'm a coastal hazard specialist, been with Noaa over 20 years, working on various inundation impacting and GIS applications. So what I'd like to do today is just give you a quick overview of climate change impacts, a little bit about what is causing sea level to rise or change, and then get into some new science that has just come out in February that's going to inform the next National Climate Assessment. And then we're going to, my colleague and I, Dan Rizza over at Climate Central, we're going to show you how that information is being pulled into decision support tools and quickly show you what some of those are and maybe how you can use those for your local planning. So I'm going to be borrowing some from the National Climate Assessment. The last one was came out in 2018, National Climate Assessment number 4, and they're going through the next process to publish a climate assessment probably sometime in 2023. But many of there's a lot of graphs on here. I am going to be showing you a lot of graphs, but I'm going to try to keep the discussion fairly non-technical. Basically, if you look at climate change indicators, there's a lot of these arrows going up. We have seen an increase in atmospheric temperature, more heat waves. We've seen increase in heavy precipitation, not necessarily the mean precipitation, but definitely more extreme precipitations. We've seen a major drought going on, for instance, in the Southwest this summer, wildfires. We've seen decreases in Arctic sea ice, which is causing issues with coastal erosion in the Arctic. And we've seen increasing in sea level rise in many locations. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, you probably heard IPCC before, just came out with their 6th assessment report. Some of the highlights showing that our carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is the highest it's been in over 2 million years. Sea level rise is rising at the fastest rate we've ever seen, well, at least in the last 3,000 years. Sea level has been pretty steady before that, which is where we've kind of built right up along the coast because we've assumed that sea level is going to stay static. And it really has started to change. Arctic sea ice is the lowest in 1,000 years, and then glaciers, we've seen unprecedented retreat more than in the last 2,000 years. And what we have seen and what's driving a lot of this change is the change in land temperature and sea temperature. So as we increase the air atmospheric temperature from global warming, then you see there the sea is also absorbing some of that heat. And of course, that directly translates to sea level rise, because we're basically heating the oceans. There's a lot of different factors that have gone into what has caused sea level rise to happen in the past. You can see there's a bunch of lines there, basically contributors, things like the expansion of the ocean itself because it's warming. Obviously, the Greenland and the Antarctic ice sheets, local smaller land-based glaciers, terrestrial water storage. But you can see then since the 20s, we've seen a pretty big increase of sea level rise. This is sort of an average across the US. And what we try to do in these IPCC reports is do global climate modeling to figure out these different scenarios of temperature. And you can see here, these SSPs are different temperature scenarios going out to 2100 and even beyond to 2150. And depending on how we act as humans, whether we reduce greenhouse gas emissions or not, could determine which of these pathways we are going to be on. Of course, the amount of temperature increase is going to affect the ocean temperature and the ice sheets. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. I'll describe that. Sea level itself changes because of various factors. One is as you heat up any liquid, it expands. We tend to see lower water levels in the winter in the US and in the Great Lakes because the water is actually colder, and so it takes up less room volume-wise. Same thing happens if you heat it over time, it will increase. That's been a lot of the driver we've seen so far globally. You see all these other things, though, that make a difference locally, which is subsidence or uplift. Places like Louisiana along the Delta, seeing 3 feet of sea level rise in the last 100 years. Some places, other places like Alaska, because of tectonic uplift, sea level is actually falling. And we also have the exchange of glaciers and land-based ice. Floating sea ice isn't really a problem because it's already displacing water, but as it breaks off and melts, the meltwater will be contributed to the overall volume. So nationally, in the past 100 years, since about 1920, we've seen about almost a foot of sea level rise, kind of average in the United States. And we're predicting through some of the new science that just came out in February, about another foot. So it's taken 100 years to have 1 foot of sea level rise. We're looking at, in the next 30 years, an additional foot, which is going to result in profound coastal flooding, profound shift, and damaging floods are going to probably happen 10 times more often. So this is just a little bit about this report that came out. It's a multi-agency report. I'll give you the website here in a minute, and you can just Google 2022 sea level rise report and find it. All the information's there. And I just want to kind of highlight some of the things out of the report. First of all, the scenarios are there. They've been updated from 2017, which is the last time these scenarios were updated. And this is the first time we're actually looking at trends, observed trends of sea level rise from tide gauges going back to 1970. And then extrapolating those out to 2050 to show you, just in some cases, where we're seeing what's called a non-stationary or non-linearity, which is it's not just a linear regression. We're starting to see the actual curve happening because of the acceleration. And some extreme water level probabilities that will help us try to figure out for design standards and planning for design, you know, if you're planning for a rain event of a 25-year or a coastal flood event of a 25-year, how is that going to change in the future? So as I mentioned, this is just kind of repeating. We're going to potentially see another foot of sea level rise, depending on the location. That it makes a difference, but average in the next 30 years, more extreme tides, high tide flooding is going to start to impact coastal areas almost every month, and profound shift in coastal flooding as we have, basically we'll still have our coastal storms, but they're going to typically become worse over time. If you read into what's causing a lot of this, as we get out in the first part of the projections by 2050, there's mostly natural variability and things going on. Then when you start getting out later on, it's more emissions driven. So the emissions and how much CO2 in the atmosphere gets added really makes a huge difference. And so there is quite a bit of uncertainty as you get farther out due to how much, we don't know how much we're going to continue to do. But for the near term, we actually have much more certainty than we did before. So by 2050, we have much greater uncertainty. So this just kind of shows you that it really is a local issue and not, I mean, yes, it's a global issue, but sea level rise really is different depending on where you live. And that is because a lot of the factors I mentioned, vertical land motion, you see there's a hot spot in Louisiana. That's mostly because land is subsiding at a rapid rate and sea levels going up. There are places like in Alaska that I mentioned, sea levels not going up as fast. In the northern parts of the country, that's the case too, because the crust is rebounding due to lack of the glaciers from the last glacial period. But generally, we're seeing this increase nationwide. And what has changed from the last scenarios is that you see the dashed line with the scenarios in 2017. They've kind of shrunk down in terms of the separation by 2050. So we have more certainty there. And overall, they're the same by 2100. The curves are a little bit different, but you can see that by 2050, we have a much better idea where we're going to be. And that's partly due to some of the extrapolations we've seen. This is an example of that. If we take the long-term record you see here, which is the sort of the jagged edges, because we know that sea level is variable, it's not going to follow this smooth curve over time. And we can extrapolate, do a best fit to that, and go out to 2050 and kind of see where extrapolated versus these projections are kind of like right in the middle. And this basically shows you that as the farther out we get, the less confident we are. And the processes that kind of that add to the lack of confidence is what we're going to do with emissions and other low confidence processes, which is how fast the ice sheets are going to respond and melt, and what is going to happen when we lose the mass of the ice sheets on land and that gets distributed to the water. It will actually make the ocean sit differently on the planet. The ice sheets have so much gravity or mass that they actually hold the water closer to them. When that mass is redistributed, it's going to change water levels. The information is available at tide gauges throughout the country, as well as a 1-degree grid. So you see the small points are tide gauges, but if you live in between tide gauges, this information is available to you too, because you can get that from a grid. So really there's no issue anymore of, well, I don't have a tide gauge near me, so I can't figure out what projections there are sea level is going to be. That's no longer the case. And I just wanted to give an example of this is in Texas, Rockport. There's an example of local sea level rise where you can see, the actual data. It goes up and down. There's natural cycles and decadal type stuff going on, but on the long period, you see this increasing trend. And then in that case, almost 2 feet in 100 years. So we've seen high tide flood events increase too. So as sea level's gone up, you can see here we have increased number of high tide flooding events, mostly on our coastal cities, kind of following that same curve. And you can see that in 2000, we had about 2 days. Now in 2020, we've had about 4 days. And then we're looking at 2050 up to 25 to 75 days a year, kind of average around the country. So many more high tide flooding events. This is like when there's no storm going on, just high tide is starting to flood streets, coming up through the storm drains, because much of the stormwater systems are connected to the ocean through tidal inlets, and they don't have backflow preventers, and they will start to flood things. And so all these things that we have going on now are current hazards, storm surge, we have issues with groundwater, riverine flow, the things that we're going to continue to deal with. Sea level is going to just add to the problem. It's going to be an over time exacerbation of the existing issues we already see. And it's going to make the floodplain expand inland. So if this is the 2010 floodplain over time, that floodplain is going to expand. So not only do you increase the vertical elevation of the BFE, base flood elevation, if you're a FEMA person or you do FEMA work, that BFE increase is going to make the floodplain footprint expand too. So that's going to put more people in the flood in the high flood risk area, special flood hazard area. And the big issue on the coastal areas is where you have extreme rainfall At the same time, you have high water levels during storms like tropical storms or hurricanes, and the stormwater system's connected, and so it can't drain from one side, it's coming in the other side, and this has become a real big issue. Places like Norfolk, Virginia, Charleston, South Carolina, Boston, there's other coastal cities dealing with this. So for local planning, we can tell you that we have a better handle on the projections to 2050. After that, it's still pretty uncertain by 2100. We've seen a definite acceleration. The big difference is the extreme scenario is no longer in there, so you have a little more time to plan for some of the worst case, because that probably won't happen until maybe 2150. But the tidal flooding that we've seen is going to continue to happen. And what we encourage folks is to, when they're using planning tools, is to use higher scenarios because you're risk averse, and it buys extra protection for other things like storm surge and precip and things like that. So you're protected from sea level rise, but you're also protecting from our current hazards. Obviously, cost is a factor. You want to use the projections to your advantage so you don't overbuild. We have better certainty in the 30-year time frame, so that may help. And as we look at things like marsh restoration or natural infrastructure, that's important because we don't want to have, it's a lot of money to rebuild marshes. And so we don't want to overbuild if we don't have to. So this is just an idea of when you're selecting scenarios with these curves, maybe looking out. This is the case of Charleston, South Carolina, where they're looking out 50 years and they're doing the range between 2 to 3 foot, which kind of follows the intermediate curve there. So that's just one way to do it. For critical infrastructure, an extra foot. So I put this in there. What are we going to do? This all seems like bad news. I make a joke, this is me at my desk. So what I'd like to do now is transition to how we're actually providing this information in planning tools and data. Something that I work on is called the Noaa Digital Coast. And it's, if you just do coast.noaa.gov or just Google Digital Coast, we have a topics page. It's all about coastal inundation. It does include lake levels too, and I'll talk about that too in the Great Lakes. We have a lake level viewer. So you can access a lot of the key data sets and tools in this section. One of the tools I will demo is our sea level rise viewer. We do have a lake level viewer, and if I have time, I'll demonstrate a stormwater tool that we have. I'm going to try to exit out of here and go to my web browser and just show you, this is our Digital Coast homepage here. The sea level, you can see topics up here. So if you go to topics, this is the coastal inundation page. We have a lot of information, including the link to the sea level rise technical report I just talked about. Go back, you can see our top products. One of them is our sea level rise viewer. Just hit launch here. I'll go ahead and show you, there's a lot of information on here. There's some story maps, there's some fly through and stuff. I think Dan's going to show you some of the stuff, Climate Central stuff. We have a few of those ourselves. I'll just get into the tool though. All right, so I can just enter in an address. I'll do Charleston because that's where I'm living right now. Charleston, South Carolina, zooms in. And what it asks you to do, you can, at first here, you can click on a location. This just shows you the customs house downtown Charleston. And then this starts out at mean high or high water, and you basically increase 1 foot increments above that to see the areas that would be impacted. Where we've added in the projection information is under local scenarios. And I don't know if you saw that in the picture there, but the water starts to flood in the picture. It shows you what is going to happen on the ground. Under local scenarios, you click on the nearest tide gauge, which is right here in Charleston. And you can look at the scenarios by year. So if you're planning to 2080, for instance, then you have the high, intermediate, high, intermediate, and low scenarios. And then you can adjust the maps to kind of match in between those. You can also compare between the 2017 projections I was telling you and the 22 projections. And you can see there used to be this extreme scenario. That's no longer there. We don't think that's going to happen by 2100 now. Eventually will happen probably by, after 2150, but allows you to do the planning there as well. So Just want to hop over to another tool we have, a lake level viewer. For those of you in the Great Lakes, you just choose your lake. I'll hit Lake Michigan. We don't have projection information in here, but one thing we do have is the current water level. So let me zoom in here. It's a good place. Okay, so that tells you that right now the current water level is 579 feet. You can see the high was 582 and the low was 5. So that shows you the variation in water levels. Click on this location and you can see how as you increase the water levels over time, shows you, it's being a little slow. I'm on my home computer today, so I don't know if it, but it'll show you what the increase in water level looks like, what areas might flood, and then at the same time, it also shows you low water conditions, what will flood too. This is not drawing right now. I think it's probably because I'm sharing my screen. So I'll just move on from there and show you one last tool. This is, if you're a stormwater type manager, planner, we've developed a tool and resources for adapting your stormwater management system for coastal floods. We have a whole section on understanding, kind of showing you what the issue is here. But we have a way to, the quick assess tool, which I'll just kind of run through this. If I run in and do Charleston again, it selects the closest tide gauge there. Then I can put in what kind of water level, what is my threshold that I'm worried about. So if I go in here and I can say, okay, I can use the map, and I see that the seawall here could be breached somewhere between 1 and 2 feet. So I use 2 feet as my threshold. Hit next. Put in the number of days that I'm worried about. If like threshold, let's say 24 days a year. If I start having high tide flooding, and it lets you choose which projections, 2022 or 2017. And then what it does is print you out this report. It gives you where your threshold is and when it's likely to intersect the sea level curves. And so it shows you that you're going to get to 2 feet by about 2050 there. Looks at the return period. When is the 1% event going to become the 10% event? And it looks at when you're going to have 24 days of flooding. When is that actually going to happen in the future based on the different scenarios? So, so that's just 3 different tools where we've pulled in this information. You can use that in there, try to make it easy to use. So the projection information is in there. Oh, now it's drawing. You can see the topographic information and the bathymetry information in our lake level viewer. We are going to actually be updating this as well in the next year or so and trying to fill data gaps. You can see we don't have any data here in some of the estuaries. Okay, and I think with that, I'm going to go back and leave the last slide. If there's any questions, I guess when we get to it, this is my email address. And I'm going to kick it over to Dan now, I think, because he's going to show, a lot of times we get a lot of questions about, and I know you guys aren't international, but there's a lot of international questions we get, and Dan's group does mapping like we do, but for the whole, globally, using some data sets, and that's very helpful because we can send folks there to get that information. They also do a lot of good information on risk assessment he'll be showing you. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Doug. Great to be presenting with you. My name's Dan Rizza. I manage the program on Sea Level Rise at Climate Central. And as Doug mentioned, our team here, our team's made up of scientists and software developers and those with media experience to develop, and we develop sea level rise related web tools designed to provide coastal stakeholders with localized information they can use to assess risk and communicate that risk. So I'm going to share my screen here.
And Dan, while you're sharing your screen, I just want to let everyone know before I forget that if you go in your GoToWebinar tool panel, I have uploaded a PDF, so it's under the handouts tab. There's a PDF there called resources, and it's going to be a whole list of resources, including links to a lot of the things that Doug showed you and mentioned, and I think there's even things in here that Dan is going to be mentioning as well. So there's a lot of good information in there, so be sure to click on that handout so that you can download a copy of the PDF. And if you happen to be viewing this after the fact and you're unable to download a PDF, we will have the resources available on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, underneath this session title. Okay, so with that quick intermission, Dan, I will hand it back to you.
And you can see my screen okay?
Yes, sure can.
Great. Thanks so much. I'd like to thank APA and Jim and Carla for inviting me to participate. And today, I'll be showing you some of the sea level rise and coastal flood tools and maps and visualizations we developed that we hope can help you in making risk real. You all know better than us the challenges related to communicating risk and having people pay attention. And we all know the statistics of, despite floods causing billions of dollars of damage, the public continues to underestimate risk in many cases. So this is a driving factor in the development of development in high risk zones and inadequate flood uptake rates and lack of preparedness. So in this presentation, we'll walk you through some of our tools here. A little bit about Climate Central. We're a non-advocacy science research and communications group based in Princeton, New Jersey, founded in 2008 by climate scientists at Princeton University and other universities. We're nonpartisan, non-advocacy. I mentioned we strive to develop localized evidence-based information and science information and solutions information for the public. Before I got into the tools, I wanted to give you some tangible examples of how our tools are being used. So environmental managers and community planners in coastal communities are dealing with flooding associated with accelerated rates of sea level rise and storm surge that Doug mentioned. So in this slide, you can see a draft risk assessment report that was recently published online. That's part of a hazard mitigation and flood management plan for the town of Warren, Rhode Island. And their civil engineer and resilience planning consultant used our risk finder tool and mapping content to show at-risk populations at certain water levels, as well as additional coastal flood risk and sea level rise risk information and statistics localized for Warren. So she told us, we reached out and we talked with her, and she told us that one of the things she liked about our tools was that our content was backed up by science and peer-reviewed research. Here's some more use cases of how people have used the tools I'm about to show you. You can see that officials from the municipal to county to federal level have used our maps and tools for planning, vulnerability assessments, risk analysis, NEPA assessments, and within NFIP's community rating system and more. When people download our materials, we give them the option to tell us who they are, where they work, and how they plan to use our materials, and this is how we get this information. So the third column is what they typed in as they downloaded these materials. And so it's a way for us to get a sense of how our tools are being used to improve them for the future, and to, in some cases, reach out to hear more about their uses. You can see how people have been using our tools within FEMA grant applications. So that's an interesting thing for us to realize, and we're thinking through ways of how our tools could be more useful in that regard, for example. And here are some word clouds of how people have been using them. Nonprofits use them as well, and you get a sense of what they're typing into the intended use field. The first tool I'm going to show you is our Risk Finder tool, which provides detailed information about the people and infrastructure and contamination risks exposed to different flood levels and sea level rise levels. I will then show you our mapping tool and our visuals next after that. So what I'll do is I'll paste in the Risk Finder URL into the chat box. Let's see if I can get the right, I want to send it to everyone. So I'm going to paste it in here, and maybe others, if I don't think I sent it to everyone, but maybe they could share it to everyone.
I'll take care of it. I got it.
Okay, great. Thanks. You could follow along is my point. It might be interesting to go dive in and take a look as I go through this. So Risk Finder, you can search for your location drill down to the zip code level, it incorporates lots of data sets from Noaa and other federal sources. You can download the images and tables you see in the tool, and it uses a bathtub model, and it's for coastal areas. We don't incorporate precipitation, and we don't really incorporate inland flooding. So we utilized Noaa LiDAR-based digital elevation models that Doug and his colleagues have compiled and worked on and made available. So we're really grateful for that, given all the work that it entails. And we also utilize Noaa tide gauge data and sea level rise projections. So in a sense, we're a case study in how nonprofit organizations can build tools utilizing federal data sets. And now I'll give you a demo of Risk Finder. You can go to riskfinder.org, and let's think through a couple of scenarios and how you might use this. But to sum it up, you can basically, it gives you the bathtub model, so you can roughly estimate what's at risk from, let's say, an incoming storm level or for sea level rise projections. So let's say there's a storm coming in and the local weather team is projecting a storm of about 7 feet. You can search for, let's say, start with your state. So you could search for Florida, and it gives you all the area types and administrative areas you can get analysis for. So just to be consistent with what Doug was showing, you could search for South Carolina, and let's go to Charleston County to show you how our tools are complementary to what Doug's tools do, and Noaa's tools. So let's say you need to communicate this risk and assess this risk. What you can do is, right off the bat, you search for your location, and you can download, click local fact sheet, you can download a fact sheet that gives you a 2-page PDF file that you can share. It gives you fact analysis about what's at risk at certain water levels. It provides historical context. It has explainers about how sea level rise is connected to climate change and coastal flooding. And it also gives you a map and has frequently asked questions and links to resources that could be useful. Another thing you can do that we see our tools being used a lot for is scrolling down. You can scroll down to the what is at risk section. And here we're utilizing the Noaa-based DEMS, putting water levels on top of that. We're starting at the local high tide line and going up X number of feet. So let's say you want to estimate the risk of a 7-foot flood, or let's say you're looking at sea level rise of 3 or 4 feet over time. You can set the water level on the left side, and we're intersecting that with, in this case, census data from 2010. We'll be updating it soon. All these data sets will be updating in the coming year. So you can look at how many people currently live on land as of the census, and as of the date we processed this, broken down by census categories. So you can also look at other variables. We have about 100 variables in here. So homes, property value, houses of worship, schools, medical facilities, and more. And so for each data set, you can click the source and the details links at the bottom to see our methodology and sources. We have road miles, rail miles, power plants. We have subcategories you can choose from here. Contamination risks. So we have a lot of EPA data in here from the Toxic Release Inventory and the FRS database. And so, for example, if you're interested in hazardous waste sites, how many of those could be at risk from an incoming storm or from sea level rise of a certain level? Choose your data set, scroll down to the map below this, and you can see which zip codes have the most hazardous waste sites at risk at that water level. And as you move the water slider on the left, you might see that the order may change. So you can kind of drill in to see where the risk is concentrated, and you can view things by town or zip code or other administrative areas. And you can click on that link, and then you can actually download a fact sheet for that zip code and explore things further. So it's just a way to, let's say you're interested in Texas, you could search for the state of Texas and scroll down to get a sense of how many contamination hazardous waste sites are at risk at certain water levels across the entire state, the coastline. Or you could drill down by congressional district, county, major city, and more. And then you can come back up here, choose, okay, I want to really look at number of people at risk, then come back down and take a look. And then you can download PowerPoint slides and images and Excel files as well with the data. I'm trying to think of other things to show you here. There's a pretty in-depth when are the risks module that has different sea level rise projections, many of them from Noaa. There's a tutorial video that unpacks that. I'd welcome you to explore the tool, and you're welcome to reach out to us at sealevel@climatecentral.org if you have questions. I'll give you some examples of the kinds of Excel files you can download. It basically will give you an Excel file with a list of all the variables I showed you for your county or zip code or state, and from 1 to 10 feet. And then it also give you facility level information in terms of which facilities may be at risk of certain water levels. We would encourage you to double check these locations. We did not vet each location in this tool, but given the amount of data we processed. And here's an example of the fact sheets you can download. And so there's also a lot of information icons and question marks throughout the tool that get into the details. So anyway, you can see the risk from a storm or how sea level rise could impact certain areas. And the statistics in this tool can complement what you may investigate in the mapping platform that I'll demo for you next. This one's called the Coastal Risk Screening Tool. And I will paste this one into the chat box as well. I would encourage you to follow along. This maps the areas at risk from coastal flooding and sea level rise under different climate and flooding scenarios. And it's interactive. We use Google Maps interface, so a lot of people are familiar with that as they use that with their phones or GPS. And you can customize the different scenarios as you go through the tool. So I will go over to that tool now, briefly show it to you. You can see we've incorporated NOAA's and the multi-agencies, the latest sea level rise projections into these tools. There's a lot under the hood here. And so let's just keep things consistent. As Doug mentioned, this is a global map. So we have this available for global locations, as you can see. But I'll just go back to Charleston to give you a sense of what's available. We take a different approach. I think you could use our tools in a complementary fashion. You can choose the year you're interested in looking at. So let's say you're looking at what could be at risk in 30 years or out to 2070. And this map is showing you the land projected to be below the annual flood level. So we're using a sea level rise projection for 2070, and then we're adding in an annual flood level on top of it. And you can go in under the hood and choose settings and change your projection type to add a 10-year flood level or a 1% annual risk flood on top of that. You can also choose the pollution pathway, the emission scenario, basically, RCPs under different scenarios. It depends on which sea level rise model you choose down here. That'll populate your options up here. And luck is the percentile. You can also choose to include levees and natural ridges that could isolate areas or not. We're in the process of updating the levees in our system over the next year. Given we use the Google Maps front end, you can use the satellite view and view things in that way. You can really zoom in and get a sense of which locations are where. You can download images and use them in your work. You can share them on social media. You can also configure the map and embed it into your site. I know there's a lot of communication needs within FEMA's CRS Activity 300 series, I believe. So this is an example of how you could embed our maps in your site if that's useful to you. What else? You can choose different maps up here on the left. So we have various maps based off of different reports and themes we've done. There's a water level map I'll show you very briefly. And this one lets you just set the water level on the left. It's pretty straightforward. You can also view the map in a simpler way without all the information on it, and zoom way out and explore the country. So you could just search for your location in the top right. It'll plug in. You could plug in specific addresses as well. Yeah, so that is our mapping platform. We welcome you to use it. And the third tool I'll show you briefly is something we call Picturing Our Future, and this allows you to. It contains visuals that can communicate the risk of long-term. It can inform long-term planning and communication regarding the mitigation of the risk of climate change. And actually, it's interesting. My conversations with planners, they're paying attention to the tools I was showing you, but in some cases, they find these visuals could be useful to them, and that it can communicate risk to their colleagues or to their stakeholders. So Picturing Our Future allows you to see what will happen under a scenario where we have 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming versus 3 or 4 degrees of warming for dozens of coastal locations around the world. And you can click through to see peer-reviewed science that it's based on. But in general, we're showing you the levels of inundation that could eventually occur centuries out, but we'll be locking in this century. So here's an example of some of the visuals we've created. We have flyovers for different locations around the world, including some in the United States. And here's one for Houston. These have been used, and CNN had a story using these. We've seen them in the media as well. Oops, let me go back to presenting mode here. And here's an example of one of the images you can download. So this is Washington, D.C. under the two different scenarios of a world that warms, the world in which we can reduce our emissions and warms 1.5 degrees C, and a world in which we continue on our current pathway, which is about 3 degrees C. We have animations as well. And then the tool itself, you can go in and basically configure. I'll show it to you very briefly, but it lets you sort. Let's say you're interested in the United States, right? So you come in, choose the region, North America, and then you can choose what you're interested in. And then you can come in and view it and download these images. Back to the slides. And actually, let me, I'll paste that in here as well, just so you have it. And finally, I'd like to show you something we're working on. It's called Flood Vision, and it's advanced data collection. It uses advanced data collection techniques and AI-based algorithms to produce highly accurate augmented reality photos of specific locations. So the idea is users will be able to choose views to contrast meaningful scenarios in their neighborhoods, such as different sea level rise projections based off of different scenarios or local storm surge forecasts. We anticipate it'll be useful to NGOs and government officials as they work. Emergency managers, for example, could use these images to strengthen evacuation warnings or other safety measures, and planners could use it to communicate the risk over time based off of different scenarios. Here's a brief video of what it is. It's basically a rig we put on top of a car, and we're driving through locations, collecting elevation data along with imagery. So it's similar to Google Street View, right? We're driving around and collecting not only just the imagery, but the location data. And this will allow us to create, as I mentioned, images at different water levels to serve different purposes. And I also wanted to mention on how some other groups have been using our materials. I've talked about how planners have been using our materials, but we see communities on the front lines of climate change using our tools as well. For example, we've been using Risk Finder for years with NAACP at workshops we've put together. Our program has worked with NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program and local partners to conduct trainings on sea level rise and coastal flood risk and social vulnerability. And these trainings have provided NAACP environmental leaders and NAACP branch presidents and other stakeholders with information and tools and science regarding the risks posed by sea level rise. And the events have also connected NAACP leaders and others with resources and experts available in their area. So we've had planners join us to present at the state and municipal level. We've had scientists from Sea Grant join us as well. Doug, Doug was kind to present at one of our events in North Charleston several years ago, 2017, and that his presentation was well received and utilized. And so the same kinds of tools I've been showing you have been used by frontline communities. Here's some more examples of groups we've worked with. Queen Quet and the Gullah Geechee in the Southeast have used our tools and provided us valuable input. We've gotten those fact sheets that I've shown you. We've gotten great feedback from the communities such as the Gullah Geechee and NAACP in terms of what's useful, what would be more useful, and we get a sense of how they're using it. And so one of the things we like to do at Climate Central is keep in touch with our end users and inform how we're developing our next versions. And on that topic, I'd like to seek your input actually. So we're in the process of revamping our tools at Climate Central, and we're conducting a needs assessment. We're doing a needs assessment interviews with stakeholders, and so if any of you could spare 20 to 30 minutes of your time to speak with me sometime in the next month or so, or if you're at ASFPM next week, we could connect there. But I'd be grateful to hear more about your work and what your goals are and which tool features we could build out that could be useful to you. So feel free to reach out to me at one of the email addresses below, or put your name in the chat box, and it'd be great to get feedback from this qualified group. And that's all I have for today. So I'll hand it back over to Carla.
Well, we're going to take some questions now. If you have questions for either of the panelists, I hope you will put them into the questions box, and I'll distribute them as I think they may be intended. If you can, please mention who you would like your question to go to. But we can start with let's see, one question I might throw to Doug about, there was a question about, a general question about strategies. Let's see here. It's a question about strategies of building seawalls versus reducing emissions overall, and where to put our efforts. The questioner is asking, what should we be concentrating on?
Okay, that's a tough one. So regardless of the emissions in the future, you know, I showed you some of those curves, and the used to be representative concentration pathways. Now they're societal something, but it's basically how much CO2 is going to lead to how much increased temperature. But at some point, like, we're already got it baked in to see a certain amount of sea level rise. So in some sense, it doesn't matter. Even if we reduce emissions now and we follow some of those lower curves, we're still going to see a certain amount of sea level rise. It may not be as extreme, but there's sort of a lag between the temperature of the atmosphere, the ocean warming, and then the ice sheet response. So I would say that they're both important, but but regardless, I think, of to what we do with emissions, we're gonna have to figure out ways to protect our infrastructure. I will say that, you know, seawalls are not our only answer. Obviously, we have seawalls now. We have one in Galveston. We have one. A lot of our coastal cities have them. Charleston has one. We already actually here in Charleston, we're retrofitting the one we have now. We're getting ready to be able to build on top of it. A lot of what you have to do with existing infrastructure, you can't just add weight and concrete on top of what's already there because it wasn't designed to handle that. So you have to go back and retrofit, or it's dilapidated. You have to retrofit all that to be able to handle adding to it. That's what's going on now, and that's expensive. In Charleston, we're also building, it's very similar to New Orleans, of putting in a whole series of tunnels and pumps to pump out water. So these kind of actions or adaptations are going to be necessary. I mean, they're necessary now because we're already experiencing flooding. It's just going to get worse. And so I think it's a combination. It's kind of fighting it on two fronts, which is the actual cause, trying to reduce it, not getting it to the point where, you know, it's going to be a runaway situation where we just won't be able to we won't be able to plan in time for some of these curves, some of the more extreme curves. Sea level is going to start rising at a rate faster than we can actually budget money and build stuff, I guess is what I'm saying. And then, so the sooner we can do that now, because that was one of the points I tried to make, is it's a no regrets approach. If you're going to retrofit infrastructure, gray infrastructure, if you're going to work with natural and nature-based, which is, you know, try to put buffers in front of these or look for other ways besides just concrete and rock and revetments, then to do, if you build that in, you're also not, for future sea level rise, you're actually still protecting yourself from the current issues of storm surge and waves and everything else. So it's, you could say it's not a bad investment either way, is what I'm getting at. So
Great.
Yeah.
There are also a number of questions coming in about the Great Lakes, and I think this kind of goes maybe to both of you. The Great Lakes and also inland waterways. First of all, questions about you know, how we can interpret sea level rise impact or these sort of changes in our inland waterways and how these issues and also the tools apply to the Great Lakes or can apply to the Great Lakes area. I don't know if you want to take a stab at that.
Sure, I can start. The projections and everything I showed you, the curves and all that, yeah, that was very open coast sea level rise specific. I didn't get much into it, but there's sections of the National Climate Assessment that deal with the Midwest, and which incorporates the Great Lakes, and there is a fair amount of study there. It's becoming more important, and actually I know some of our Noaa colleagues are at the Great Lakes Environmental Lab, plural, and they are investing money in research to look at future climate change impacts on the future water levels and potentially coming up with some future scenarios for planning community. Right now, those don't really exist in terms of future scenarios. What we do have is a good historical database of historical water levels that they maintain. There's something called the Water Level Dashboard. If you Google that, GLERL maintains that. It's really good, goes back, you know, early 1900s. It has all the water levels that have ever occurred. You can see the ups and downs. The latest climate assessment hints at maybe a potential small increase in water levels, but it's still pretty uncertain. And it's a whole different set of drivers in the Great Lakes than it is for the ocean. It has more to do with evapotranspiration and snow melt and precip than it does anything related to, you know, ocean temperature and things like that, or lake temperature. But at the same time, the Great Lakes NOAA does manage the Great Lakes just like our open coasts, and they experience the same coastal hazards, bluff erosion, wave impacts, dune erosion, beach erosion, and all the things. So obviously increased lake levels make that all worse. And so if that's going to be the case, you're going to continue to see over time. And we're also trying to work on providing some of the same information on frequency, historical frequency events on the Great Lakes too, so that you could get an idea of what, let's say, a 10% storm is now and where would it be in the future if water levels were to rise. That helps in the engineering community design infrastructure for the future.
Dan, did you want to add something about that?
No, I think Doug covered it well. His tools are more, he has more tools for that. We cover the coast mostly.
There's a kind of a follow-up question. Are there any other tools that you'd recommend looking at or reference from your resources document?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to speak to that. There's a great resource that was developed. We worked with Noaa and TNC and others to develop a web tool matrix to compare functions of these tools to give planners a detailed sense of what's at risk, or basically what functions and features and baseline data sets we're using. And the Office for Coastal Management, Noaa, has developed one of these with others for the state of California. So I put the link in there. I hope you could share that with the larger group. It's at seethefuture.org, and it has a lot of the Noaa tools in there, our tools, and others for the state of California. But a lot of these tools are national, so you can really dig through this matrix, this interactive matrix, and filter based on what you're interested, your geographic scope, and the shoreline processes and the exposure analysis you're interested in, and it'll filter the tools down. There's another one at gulftree.org that I'd recommend checking out if you're in the Gulf Coast. It has a similar filtered search to help you figure out, like, what are you interested in, where are you, and it'll help you filter down these tools into ones that be applicable to your interests. Doug, you might have other suggestions. I know there's the Digital Coast platform and a lot of other great portals out there.
I think Doug may be frozen. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Well, we will we'll put the resources mentioned so far into the chat. Maybe Dan, you could send them to Christine and she'll pop them in there.
Yeah.
And it looks like Doug is going to try to rejoin us. Somebody else is asking, I guess it's more of a technical question about integrating the tools into planning documents and analysis. The question is it available? Are these reports available to download and integrate as a layer?
So I know that Doug and his team at Noaa offer a lot of downloads, data downloads. At Climate Central, all of the reports that you can download from localized reports and fact sheets from our web tool are available in PDF format and other PowerPoint and other formats. We do offer sea level rise projection layers, and you can reach out to me if you're interested in that. They're global at this point, so they're not tailored to a specific location. But we do get that request quite a bit, so we're keeping that in mind to perhaps in the future offer a more streamlined interface to provide these to planners.
Terrific.
I would encourage you all you can embed our maps. That's probably the quickest and easiest way to specify a specific sea level rise scenario and get it into your materials. But we welcome you to use any of our materials, and please feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about our tools and how they could be useful to you.
Another attendee is asking at what stage to use these tools in their planning processes, and when to incorporate them in reports, or at what stage of the process to bring these tools in. I wonder if you can speak to that at all.
From the planners that I've spoken to in the past, you can see they're using it within kind of risk assessments that they're putting into their mitigation plans, along with their other research. I see them using it at the front end as a screening level tool to see generally what's at risk, and then they can then see where the hotspots are and maybe do more advanced analysis on their own after they've used our first level screening level analysis. We also see city officials using our tools as a reference point. So let's say there are specific sea level rise projections. Some cities have their own projections, right, in states. So there's certain more specific projections you're looking at. You could still use those projections and come back and use our tools as reference points. Look at our maps at certain water levels and then incorporate those into your report to link up to the more localized projections that you're using. But to be honest, I see folks using mostly at the front end and in the middle. And then as I mentioned, you can use our maps and visuals to help communicate your reports and findings to different stakeholders or to your colleagues in other departments. I wish Doug were here. I'm sure you'd have lots of great insight on that.
Hopefully he'll be back. But to give you just a second's rest, Dan, maybe I'll turn to Jim for a second. Jim, I know you had a question that you were thinking of posing to the panelists, and this might be a good time to do it if you have that handy. And meanwhile, other people, if you have additional questions, please do post them in the questions portion of your control panel.
Okay. Yes, I do have the question handy, Carla. My question was, what, in your view, is the single most important thing that planners can do to make these tools useful to residents and community organizations in the most vulnerable neighborhoods? You talked a little bit about that with the NAACP, using your tools and so on. But yeah, I ask it as a kind of a means for planners to achieve some social equity in regard to these issues.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say communication is important. Involving and communicating with frontline communities and others early in the process could be quite insightful and helpful as you think through what kinds of planning and risk assessments you could do. You can find out from them where their concern is. There's a lot of insight they have through their own history and experience in wherever they're living that could give you additional information. And there may be data sets that they're aware of that you should be aware of and think about. But I would say, communication early on would be the single most important thing to kind of involve them in the process. And I think you'll find more success in the end with more people. And I know, and just this is kind of unrelated, but the work that I do, we reach out early to our end users and see what their interests and concerns are, and that can help shape what we're able to provide. And then they'll end up using what you provide more and trust it more, and kind of start that process of developing new relationships that could, I think the long-term relationships could be important over time.
So bottom line, emphasize the front end involvement rather than.
I think so, and maybe there's a way to incorporate their involvement in, maybe their advisory committees or ways to assess kind of decisions that are made, so that they understand why decisions are made and are able to have a say in that process. Welcome back, Doug.
Excellent, Doug's
Sorry
back.
about that. My internet completely just quit on me. I had to go reset my modem. Sorry.
No problem.
We're glad to see you again. There's a question that's popped up a couple times, and hopefully Christine can help us out with this one, to put the class registration number in the chat again so that folks who came in late would be able to log their AICP credits. I can look it up in a minute if she's not available. But
I will put it in the chat, but also just remember you can always find all that information on our website, the name, the event number, slide, the link to the video recording, all of that. You can always get that on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, but I'll put the ID number in right now.
Perfect, thank you so much. Here's another question that came in that either of you could take a shot at. Somebody's asking here, are there any communities that you know of who've done a good job of incorporating and executing successful positive projects, I guess using your tools or using tools like these? Any examples you'd point to in particular that people might research and look at?
Doug, I hate to talk about Charleston again, but I know that the Charleston officials are doing a great job there and have been using tools like ours in that process.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples. I think if you look just generally at the sea level rise projection information that come out of the climate assessment that I kind of went over, the latest of that is being used by many states in some cases, even executive orders that's saying that, you have to, for state planning projects design, you have to incorporate sea level rise impacts and look at certain scenarios. California has their own set of projections, which kind of mirror the national ones. Other agencies, obviously, other federal agencies use the same information. It's kind of, those projections are sort of developed together with the other agencies. And, some states have done it at the state level, and it just depends on it may have to do with the flavor of the politics in that state, but a good example is Florida, right? So there's no real state policy in Florida, but South Florida has really been, of course, they're on the front lines. We've got Miami-Dade, where they have like two issues. Sea levels coming up in one direction, and then they have limestone underneath them, so the freshwater floats on the saltwater, and as the saltwater wedge comes in, it's causing groundwater to basically be at the surface all the time. And so they are really taking it seriously and looking at a lot of these same projections, and they're updating the projections as well. And they are building tools. I think Florida also has the state now has they're trying to build a tool for being able to use this information to basically do like freeboard and things like that. And that's another example. Even though we don't do it at the federal level yet, we just, well, the federal flood risk management standard was just reinstated. And so much like many states are already doing, they're requiring 2 or 3 foot of freeboard for future, building above the base flood elevation because of things like sea level rise. And it's more expensive to do up front, but it's like the mitigation equation, $4 spent on mitigation, or I think it may be up to $6 now. Every dollar spent on mitigation, not greenhouse gas mitigation, but mitigation for flooding, saves $6 down the road. So that kind of stuff has been used a lot. But you're right, Dan. Charleston is a good example. I like to use it because I'm here and I've helped advise them on their strategies. And many of it's kind of interesting that the places where it's actually starting to really impact on a daily basis or a monthly basis, like high tide flooding, they're doing it now because they have to. So sometimes at the state level, sometimes not. We're seeing it happen.
And we see at the regional level, we see planners up in Massachusetts, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC, has used our tools, and others for assessing risk and communicating that. The Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission's another. Often these planners they use Climate Central tools for their presentations as a start to communicate the risk.
And I didn't get to mention in my talk, but all of our, like you mentioned, like all of our data is downloadable. We provide all the digital elevation models all of the inundation layers, all the map services are there to be used in local tools.
Yeah, there was that question, Doug. Could people download layers for their own use? So you just answered that.
Yes, they can. If they go to our site, there's a data download button and it has all the data in there. And same thing, if you're interested in the projection information from that new report, it's all there too. If you Google that. So, and I think that's an important point, is that now you don't have to rely necessarily on just a federal tool like ours, and because we can't really do everything for everybody, every place, and every location, and very like high resolution. So a lot of what we see is folks like Climate Central using our data to customize, value add. We have a great example in New Jersey where they've pulled in, we actually gave them the code to our viewer. They have their own data in there. And we see that more and more. Nature Conservancy has a coastal resilience tool. They pull in our map services into that. Many of the map layers we have can be pulled into anything that you want. So it's become very easy to do with technology now. That even though you don't have to just go to someone's viewer anymore, you can actually go behind the scenes and get the maps that are being provided there and pull that into your own system.
Terrific. We are getting close to time, so I think we just have time for one more quick question. So I'll have to choose here. We had an earlier question about another sector, whether you are seeing any increased activity from inquiries from the insurance sector for, obviously the risk facing commercial and residential development. What has been your experience with that? Are you seeing more inquiries from insurance providers, or what's your take on that?
I could start if you'd like. We are hearing more from the insurance sector. They're interested in what's their risk to their portfolio and other factors. And so a lot of them have used our maps, or they inquire about some of the products that we offer. And we're also hearing from, a lot of people from the financial sector, banks. And what's interesting is in the past, when we would release something, we would get media attention, then we would get a lot of requests for this kind of thing. And now it seems to be more steady, and there's been an uptick that hasn't gone down in the last, I'd say, 6 months or so.
Terrific.
I could add to that and say that at Noaa, we've been engaged more with the reinsurance groups because they're having to bear the brunt of the risk of they're basically insuring the insurers. And they're starting to really look at, whereas most insurance policies are 1 year risk policies. They're kind of like current, just like your flood insurance. It's only for that 1 year. But they're really starting to look at the impacts down the road of loss, and how we've just seen an incredible increase in losses. And then there's the question of who pays for that, and the rates going up. One of the things in terms, because I mentioned flood insurance, that's really been going on, is that FEMA kind of the catalyst was 2012 Bigger Waters flood insurance, whatever the name of the flood insurance bill, basically set up the Technical Mapping Advisory Council to advise FEMA on how to include future conditions and sea level rise and other factors into the mapping and the insurance process. And that's still going on. The 2021 annual report just got released, should be posted to FEMA's website soon. And that has reevaluating all the recommendations that we've made to FEMA and how they should incorporate the idea of looking at future risk, not just today's risk, because what we're seeing is this idea of the past is not necessarily the reflective of what's going to happen in the future, because everything we based our flood insurance on, and a lot of our insurance, that health insurance is based on your past history and not what's going to happen in the future. So we see non-stationarity happening in these curves. So you can't base what used to be the 100-year floodplain that's going to increase, as I showed you in my slides. So yeah, everybody's taking it a lot more seriously.
Terrific. Well, I think that brings us to time. So I would just want to thank Doug and Dan and Jim for your expertise on this topic. I know it drew quite a lot of interest. We had close to 300 people watching, and I know that the recording is going to be available very shortly if anybody wanted to share with somebody, another colleague who's interested in the topic. Christine, is there anything else we need to
That's
say?
it. Just head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast to register for all of our upcoming sessions and to get whatever information you might need from this session. Thanks to everyone for the collaboration of divisions and for our speakers today. We appreciate you, and thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a great weekend.